really good shape. Oh my God.
So, private pilot guided flight discovery, day 5. Here's the agenda. We've covered a few things. Stage 2 exam is available. From what I'm getting, it's not taking anyone very long to do. So we can get that. If you get it done tonight, I'll try to watch. Once I get finished here tonight, I'm going to go back and kind of watch the emails and see how they come. If you guys got some questions or you can get on the message board, ask me, and I'll certainly get back together with you. Today, ground lesson 11, ground lesson 12. Okay? All right. So here we go. Performance and navigation. I got, I'm sure, there. I got Guided Flight Discovery, Chapter 8. Inside the Pilot Handbook for Aeronautical Knowledge, Chapter 11. And the FAA Weight and Balance Handbook. That was one of those handbooks on day 1 that I had each slide up here, and I showed you, hey, you gotta have Airplane Flight Handbook, that's a good reference, Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, so forth. We did have the FAA Weight and Balance Handbook. This, again, is comprehensive. From A to Z will include everything. So a good reference, but not a good book to open to page 1 and say, let me start reading this. Go to page 2, let me read that. You'll be asleep by page 3, okay, and you won't get any of it. But we'll go through the ins and outs and exactly how we get this. Then we're going to take some time and look at an AFM or a POH, an airplane flight manual or a pilot operating handbook, right? Okay, predicting performance. Key terms: performance, performance charts, interpolation, density altitude, headwind component, crosswind, tailwind component, runway gradient. So sometimes you got a slight grade up and down, kind of a little bit of a slope. Sometimes if you're going to some mountainous terrain, you might have a really nice slope. I landed at one in North Carolina, and I got a kind of a neat video. If I get a chance, we'll share it. Just coming straight down the backside of a mountain, and then I touched down on the runway, which also was going down. But in the middle, it started coming back up. So I knew I had sufficient performance, but the people in the back were a little excited about what was happening, okay? Braking effectiveness, hydroplaning. By the way, brakes are not more effective if they are locked. All right, seems strange. I'll give you a good example of that one as well. Hydroplaning, approach airspeeds, couple of climb airspeeds, VX and VY, a little play on the alphabet there. Cruise climb speed, in order something to climb at if I don't need to climb over an obstacle, if I don't need to climb to my altitude in the fastest amount of time. How can I climb with the most visibility, the maximum cooling on the engine? Remember, these airplanes are air-cooled, so a lot of emphasis here on the cruise climb speed, okay? Where's the top of this thing? What's the highest that I can climb, the absolute ceiling and the service ceiling? Our cruising speed, do you guys remember my favorite cruising speed? One what? 120, perfect. And why? Because whoever designed a clock put 60 minutes on it. So I do 2 miles a minute. It makes really easy calculations if I need to divert. I don't need to pull out a calculator. I just got this thing up here, and I can take my distance and cut it in half. That's how long it'll take for me to get there, all right? Maximum level flight speed, maximum range speed, and maximum endurance speed. A little play there on the drag profiles. I have parasite drag, I have induced drag. These two things behave differently as a function of airspeed. So where's my maximum endurance? Where's my maximum range speed? Okay, performance. What in the world is performance? The performance of an airplane that's designed to turn upside down and do aerobatics, well, that performance might be completely different from the airplane that's designed to intercept and destroy targets. Okay? And then you go on down the list. What's the purpose of this airplane? To take the maximum amount of people with the minimum amount of cost and provide the smoothest ride that's safe to far long-range destinations. Crop dusting. This is a picture of our crop dusters. We put a PT6 on the front of most of our crop dusters, a small little turbine engine that actually works on reverse flow. It's fantastic. It really is kind of neat. I've seen pictures and recently studied a little bit about the Antonov 2. That's a neat airplane. Does the same thing. The purpose of that airplane completely different than any of these other airplanes or from our training airplane. So when we're talking performance, I talk generally speaking about performance. Then we start tailoring it to this is the performance that we desire. A training airplane, something that is easy to fly, something that I can maneuver around and maybe, start to learn how to land this thing without breaking it. Those are the areas that we're talking performance today. Now, a couple of different ways that we can come at the performance models. We can come at the performance models with a table, or we can come at the performance models with the graph. Both provide the same type of information. And depending on my airplane manufacturer, I may have one, I may have the other, or I may have both. Beechcraft does it a certain way for takeoffs and landings and for cruise. Cessna does it a certain way. Cirrus does it a certain way. Sometimes they provide the same information in two different ways. So I could either find this performance, whatever the desired performance is. In this case, it looks like I have takeoff distance. I can find it using the graph or the chart, or I can find it using a graph. Whatever the manufacturer gives me, that's what I have to use. Okay? All right. Some of the things that I need to know right away about the performance graphs and the performance charts is I have to read the notes. Here in the notes, it'll tell me my associated conditions, and it'll also tell me any type of adjustments I have to make to the final answer. So on these notes for takeoff distance in this airplane, what kind of airplane is this? I don't know. It looks a lot like a training airplane. I don't know what specifically kind of airplane this is though. It's some sort of an airplane. For this airplane, we're going to use flaps 10 degrees. We're going to use full throttle prior to brake release. So this becomes a little bit of a challenge for me in that busy airport. I need to know that I will be authorized time to assume the takeoff runway, push the brakes all the way, advance my throttle, allow the engine to obtain takeoff power, and then release the brakes. Now, what I just described to you is no longer than 5, 6, 7 seconds at the most. I'm telling you, if you try to use that 5, 6, 7 seconds at Fort Lauderdale Executive without permission, you're going to get a lot of bad remarks, okay? Because chances are likely there's somebody else that's landing behind you, and they are right there. Okay? They're just about ready to land. So it's time for us to get off the runway unless I have a prior permission from ATC to take what's called a short delay. Okay, so the associated conditions already they affect the means by which I'm going to go out and fly this airplane and the procedure that I'll use to request permission to take off from ATC. I have a paved, dry, level runway. Oh, any changes to this, then I got to start making adjustments. And then zero wind. Most of my charts are going to show me, especially the tables, will give me an answer for wind at 0. Wind at 0 rarely happens, but it's just a place for me to start. And then I begin to apply, for the wind 0 example, for instance, distances decrease 10% for each 9 knots of headwind component. Okay? So it's not a complicated chart, not one bit at all. None of these things are complicated, but what's important is that I sit down, I take just a little bit of time, 1, 2, 3 minutes, whatever, and I go through with my current conditions, I go through and I find the answer that's representative of the performance I expect for today. Okay? So number one, I start with whatever the weight of the airplane is. This one only gives us 2,400 pounds. And that's not uncommon, especially for tables. I'll have a second page that'll show me this is you for 2,000 pounds. And that's just what I get. So take the highest of which one you are. If I'm in a little bit higher weight, calculate for that worst case condition so that when I get out there and I get a little bit better performance, at least I'm not selling myself short. In other words, at least I didn't plan for an airplane a little bit lighter, and then now I don't have enough room to take off, okay? So, weight's 2,400 pounds. Takeoff speed, liftoff is 51. At a 50-foot height over the ground, I expect to see 56. So this is me pulling vigorously on these controls. Vigorously, I mean, yeah, you're going to pull a lot harder than what you normally do. I'm going to get the airplane, I'm going to lift up, and then as it accelerates, I'm going to continue to increase that pitch angle. Is this what I'll do on most normal climbs? No. This would be more representative of the maximum performance takeoff that I can make in this airplane. But I'm not going to do that on a daily basis, not one bit at all. Because if I had me and my mom and my dad in the back and my sister in this thing, and I try to take off with that maximum performance takeoff, somebody's probably going to make a mess in that airplane, okay? So instead what I would do is I would just climb, get the airplane rotated at a normal rotation speed, and then I'll make a cruise climb. So while you're thinking performance and while you are calculating performance, remember, I'm calculating performance for that very worst case scenario. And it's not likely I'll use this on a daily basis, but I still have that as a baseline. I know this is the minimum amount that I would need. Then you go to your pressure altitude. What's pressure altitude? Just to come back and review altitudes again, we had a bunch of different ones. Well, if I'm doing millibars, right? What if I'm doing inches of mercury? What do I got? Okay, so is that where the pressure is, 2992? What's that? Yeah, this is just pressure altitude. What you're telling me is density altitude. We're going to solve for that one in just a second. Where was that standard datum plane? Sea level is sea level. The standard datum plane is wherever 29.92 exists. It could be higher or lower than sea level. So this is my altitude above the standard datum plane. I find this by rolling 29.92 in my altimeter setting, and then I read it on the altimeter. Generally speaking, what you'll do here, there is an exact conversion that you could use, but generally speaking, to the nearest 1,000 feet, you will round up or down, okay, and use your field elevation. Whatever that field elevation is, this is what we're going to use, okay? Then, look at we knew that we're going to have to get somewhere around 15 degrees Celsius, or adjust anyways for some sort of non-standard temperature. Now we adjust for the non-standard temperature in each one of these columns. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. If I have a temperature that's in between, and this works for pressure as well, it works for weight, it works for everything, but if I have a temperature that's in the middle, say I have exactly 25 degrees Celsius, then I'll find the answer for 20, I'll find the answer for 30, and then I will interpolate. All right? Who knows exactly how to interpolate? I'll have you come up here and show everybody on the board. You know how to do it? Yeah, it's easy. I understand that. Okay. So, not too hard, but I know if I'm right in between the two, so say for instance 25 degrees Celsius, I'm right in between these two, I'll just take the average because it's the point right in the middle. So 925 to 1,000, I'll add these two together and divide it by 2 because I'm right in between. But what if I had 22 degrees Celsius? Could I use exactly average if I was trying to find 22 degrees Celsius? I couldn't. So instead, to interpolate, what I would do is I would find out what's the difference between these two, 75. I divide it by 10, and I get 7.5. Then I add 7.5 for each 1 degree that I am increased. So in this case, 7.5, 22 is what I'm looking for. So 7.5, I'm going to multiply by 2 to get that 2. I'm just going to go up 15 feet. So just 15 feet it added on there, 940. Is everybody happy and comfortable about that? It's not terribly difficult. It's not rocket surgery. We're not reinventing the wheel here. You're just looking for some sort of answer between the two of them. And if you get very, very close, 940 feet to 960 feet, okay, I got you. These are very accurate estimations, but that's exactly what it is. Be able to estimate. That's what I call, and what a lot of people, I'm a strange person even in America, but it's what I call the swag. Anyone heard of a swag? SWAG stands for scientific wild ass guess. Okay, that's exactly what SWAG stands for. So you're taking science and you're applying just, I'm getting really, really close, but I could care less about that 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, okay? I'm not losing sleep over it. All right, so that's how we're going to use, in this case, takeoff performance for the chart. Now, takeoff performance is always mentioned in two ways. In the U.S., we always take the performance up to 50 feet. So 50 feet above the ground after we take off. So I'm interested in how much distance it takes for me from brake release to get in the air. That's interesting, and that's called ground roll. And then I'm interested, once I get in the air, what good is that for me? Not really anything. I'm just in the air. If I don't get over the fence, I'm going to crash into the fence, right? So once I get in the air, how much distance? And then how far until I get over 50 feet? Because now I can clear the fence. Now I can clear the 7-Eleven that's on the corner of the street over there just off the airport, right? I'm interested in how much room until I stop making myself look like a danger to people around me, okay? All right, so you got ground roll for however many feet and then takeoff total to clear the 50-foot obstacle. Same thing here. This one, different airplane, okay? I want you guys, I know it's on the same slide and that's why it gets a little confusing. Different airplane, okay? So this airplane, it has a 0 flaps takeoff. Who cares that it's on the same page? It's just a different airplane. 0 flaps take off and they give me some associated conditions. Those associated conditions are paved level dry runway, full power before brake release, and flaps 0. Then I solve, and I have no interpolation at all because I solve for each problem as I go. What's problem number 1 in performance for an airplane, no matter what you're talking about? Air density. So the first thing I'm going to solve is, what's the temperature? And I'm going to take that temperature, I'll go up to whichever one of these lines are associated with my pressure altitude or the field elevation. So the example here is I got 25 degrees Celsius, and up we go. We're going to go to, it looks like sea level, 1,000, 2,000, about 1,500. You go here, that's your point. So you have solved for air density. Well, what do I do with that solution? What do I do with that answer? You just carry it horizontally, right? Wherever I came to, you just carry it 100% horizontally to the reference line. And at that reference line, you solve for the next problem. So air density is the first problem for me trying to take off or land. What's my next problem? How much does this stupid thing weigh? How heavy is it? Okay? So now I come down to whatever the weight is, and I have solved that problem. What do I do with the answer? Move the answer straight horizontally to the next reference line. And I solve for either takeoff ground roll or over the 50-foot obstacle in the wind, okay? So the very first one is wind for, looks like here I got 14 knots. 14 knots go here. I got 2,300 feet. If I were solving for ground roll and 50-foot obstacle, it would be the next chart. Okay? So you're just making a solution each time and then carrying that parallel to this horizontal reference line and going right over to the vertical reference line and solving the next problem. Okay, so takeoff distance, here we go. Conditions, you got notes, looking at a sample takeoff chart, given pressure altitude. So we're looking at that. You got a pressure altitude of 1,500 feet. It falls between 1,000 and 2,000. This means if the outside air temperature is 30, your ground roll distance will fall in between these two. So if I have 30 degrees Celsius, my ground roll is between these two because the airplane weighs 1,500 pounds. Or, excuse me, because the pressure altitude is 1,500 feet. So just like I could interpolate between the two temperatures, I can also interpolate between the two pressure altitudes. To solve for the ground roll, interpolation is necessary. Well, it's just halfway between the two. This is the easiest interpolation problem that you'll get. Pressure altitude between 1,000 and 2,000 feet, the difference is 1,000. Ground roll, I'm looking at 110 feet difference between these two. 1,500-foot airplane pressure altitude is half. The easiest one you could get. Therefore, the ground roll is also halfway between the two. The answer is 1145. 110 divided by 2 and then added to that lowest figure. So the performance values that are listed here in the performance charts and tables all assume, number one, that I have a pilot that's going to follow the procedures. So if the procedures tell me to extend the flaps 10 and set full power prior to brake release, that's what the pilot's going to do. They're not going to go out there and, oh, by the way, they're going to use maximum available runway, not go, 30, 40, 50, 80, 100 feet down the runway and then start this process, okay? So they're going to use the approved procedure. They're going to use the procedures as approved by the book. They use maximum available runway. And the only assumption that is made here is that the airplane is properly maintained, that the engine is in good working order, and that all systems are operational. That's it. Okay? Nothing on here declares that this isn't a brand new airplane with a test that's got Chuck Yeager flying. A 23-year-old version of Chuck Yeager is flying this thing, and he has 7 saints praying for him on each side of the runway. No, none of that stuff. Now, there's going to be some examiners and some pilots all over the place that are going to get their feelings hurt about that because they say, oh, yeah, this means that you got to have ideal conditions in the world. Things don't always work out that way. It's 100% baloney. All you got to do is follow the procedure. You got to have a properly maintained airplane with a tuned engine, a normally running engine, which they all are. And if they're not, you'll know. And you have to have all your systems working. That's all you need. Okay? I know this because the chart values that I get on here, I can consistently do better than those chart values. So I want you to make sure that when you're getting your chart values, the idea is that you have confidence in that number. All I have to do is apply the knowledge that I know and the skills that I know to take off just like I'm supposed to. You will get that. How does it influence a takeoff? That's fine. So if I have water on my runway, it depends on what type of runway I have. If I have a grooved runway, typically the water is going to go down into the grooves and it won't make too much of a difference on takeoff. But if I hit a puddle, what's going to happen? Well, there's a little bit of friction there. There could be some hydroplaning. There's a change in viscosity. So I get a reduction, just a slight reduction. The idea here is if you get these values, this is for a dry runway. I have to change that slightly for a wet runway. The other idea is that it's paved. Because if I'm taking off from a grass runway, you will have a longer takeoff run because there's more friction between those tires, the landing gear, and that grass. And it could be bumpy. There's all sorts of different things. Now, I've got a great runway over there that I usually take pilots to, and I land on a soft field. I do that because when I started flying, we actually had to land on soft fields and take off from soft fields, okay? And then for the next 2 decades, people never did it because flight schools and aircraft owners didn't want their airplane over to soft field. People were crashing them. But I would love to take each one of you over to, it's a nice runway. It's right there, Foxtrot 45. Runway 9 left. We'll go over there. We'll land on a grass runway. We'll take off, right? There's a different procedure, by the way, for that soft field takeoff. Let's get into some other engine performance, all right? Some airplanes, and depending on the airplane that I have, are going to give me engine performance in a chart just like this. This is usually a Piper chart, all right? But let's talk about it. It's got a lot of good material on this chart. I want to know what the associated conditions are for the engine performing probably here at cruise flight. Because my performance when I'm taking off, my performance in single engine piston driven airplanes is all based on me having my takeoff power setting. And my takeoff power setting is everything I got, okay? So full open, that's how you take off. And you advance the throttle exactly like this for takeoff. 1001, and it's full, right? We're not gonna go like this. No, 1001, okay? And it's full. Okay, now, coming back to this, if I'm going to cruise, I can't maintain 100% brake horsepower for the entire flight. I will accelerate the way in which this airplane begins to fall apart, okay? It will not last as long if I do that. Instead, the maximum power that I could use normally in a piston-driven airplane is 75%. Was a percent brake horsepower gauge listed on my required gauges and instruments? No. I don't have a percent power gauge that's required. Some airplanes have that. The Cirrus has that. That's kind of nice. But I have to use a chart like this to determine what's my percentage horsepower. Best power, meaning I am leaned until the maximum RPM to the maximum heat and not any less. That's my best power. I'm at best power mixture for 55% power, and then best economy is 6.6. I know if I have a fuel flow indicator where to put these numbers to get best power at 55, 65, or 75%. Without a fuel flow indicator, and it's not required, and you don't have one in the training airplanes, I just have to use an RPM setting and then consider where my true airspeed is. All right, let's follow along. What's the first thing I'm going to solve for when I'm doing any performance? Air density, because air density rules everything. So I go up from my temperature to whatever my setting and whatever my field elevation is, okay, and then come across to the power you choose. 55, 65, or 75%. And then come straight down and it will allow me to see what my engine RPM is required for that setting. Now, by looking at this chart, I know automatically that I have no control over RPM. I have no control over the propeller setting, okay? Because if I had control over propeller setting, I'd have manifold pressure and RPM, and I don't have that here. All I have is just RPM, that's it. So get used to the idea that I have, all right, either 55, 65, or 75% brake horsepower. Those are your cruising power settings. And it will correspond in a fixed pitch propeller like you fly for training. It'll correspond exactly to your engine speed. Okay?
have these classes in SkyEagle Aviation Academy. Check out please our website www.atp.academy for details.
All right. This is an air density chart and how to correct for pressure altitude. Earlier the question is, what is pressure altitude? Just as a review. Well, some of this stuff we start to review and that's important. Pressure altitude we said is the altitude above the standard datum plane. Well, give me one real quick. What's true altitude? MSL. I love the answer. That's right. True altitude, MSL. Just those two, put them together. That's what they are. Above mean sea level, okay, with the current altimeter setting. We're going to assume you got a good altimeter setting. It's a good assumption, okay? What about absolute altitude? What's absolute altitude? AGL, above ground level, above terrain. That's correct, okay? So how high am I? If I look straight down, absolutely above that piece of rock, okay? What's density altitude? We're going to start figuring this out. That was one of the best answers, yes. He's saying it's the altitude at which the airplane is performing, okay? I like the answer because it's not the standard book answer. What's the standard book answer? Somebody knows it. Density altitude, what's the book answer for that? Pressure altitude, corrected for non-standard temperature. All right, that one, pilots will remember, and I like it. You have to remember that one. But what makes sense to me is this is the altitude at which this airplane is performing. We're going to see another example, so just park this for a second. But do you guys remember that airfield I showed you that was 9,900 feet? And I told you that if the temperature was hot at that day, you might not be able to take off at all. The reason being 9,900 feet, that's field elevation. But if the temperature is very, very hot, I might have air density for a density altitude 12, 13, 14,000 feet, and it exceeds my service ceiling. I can't take off, much less fly around that place, okay? All right, how do I get pressure altitude if I don't have my altimeter set to 2992? Okay, easy answer. Turn it until it sets to 2992. Thank you. That is a great idea. Yes, you are 100% correct. But what if I'm looking at it on a piece of paper as part of a test? Can I change the altimeter setting on that test? I can't tell you how many times when I was taking my test, I could just see myself reaching into the paper and turning the thing. Okay, but you can't. So instead, I got to use a conversion. And it's simple for me to use my conversion. Whatever my altimeter setting is, I consider what the correction factor is for that altimeter setting, and that brings me back to pressure altitude. So if I want to know my exact pressure altitude, in this example, my altimeter setting is 30.1. And I have whatever my MSL value is on the altimeter. Subtract 165 from that, and that gives me pressure altitude. Okay? Follow me for a minute. What do we always use in air density questions on performance? Pressure altitude. Pressure altitude, right? Look at this. This is pressure altitude. But also, remember, some of this stuff is just real. Some of this stuff I got to give you, how am I going to do this on a daily basis? Or how am I going to do this to get my swag? All right? Well, if your altimeter setting is 30.1, you're only correcting by 165. How easy is it to correct this between 7,000 or 6,000 and 7,000 feet for 165? Nah, that's ridiculous, right? It's very difficult for me to find 165 on this. I could probably find 6,000, 6,500, 7,000. Maybe I'll argue with you that we could find 6,250, maybe 6,750. If I really had a straight ruler and a sharp pencil, maybe I could get you those three, right? But I could get you either 6,000, 6,500, or 7,000 for sure. even with a fat finger and a fingernail. Okay? Don't get caught too much up into getting the exact number for your pressure altitude. If your field elevation shows that you're at 700 feet, then go back to this chart and find where 700 feet is and call it a day. Don't go out to the altimeter and find, yeah, I'm at 30.1. I'm going to take 165 off 700, and that gives me, I don't even know what it is yet. Okay, we're already confused. Okay. So that's just something to think about with that pressure altitude. But this one also gives me an approximation for air density, for density altitude. Let's take that same exact airport that we discussed earlier, the 9,900 feet. Can we find 9,900 on there? Yeah, I'm going to call it right there. Right? That line right there. I'm going to go just a little bit under that line right there. Then, let's say just a little bit under that line, I've got 60 degrees or a little bit less than maybe 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, almost, yeah, probably around 15 degrees Celsius. So I'm going to come here, 15. I'm going to go all the way up. I'm going to go up to my 10,000 and then come across. What is the air density on that airfield right now? Almost 12,000 feet, right? Like I said, it doesn't take long and you've got an airfield that's unusable. If I was at sea level and I have very hot temperatures, which is typically the case for us, sea level 90 degrees. That's normal. I'm at sea level, I got 90 degrees. What's my air density? Holy smokes. The airplane is performing as if I was on a field that was at 2,200 feet. And I'm actually at sea level. So I would expect better performance at sea level for acceleration, for takeoff, for landing, for things like this. But I'm not going to get it today because the temperature is so high. All right? Now, ask me a couple questions because I know we're just there. And it's important, like I said, if everything we do with performance revolves around air density and you don't know enough about air density, then the rest of this turns into a disaster. So I always say that taking one of these classes is a lot like somebody hooking their face up to a fire hose and me turning it on. There you go. Drink that. So yeah, I get it. We've talked about a lot already. So let's talk air density for a minute. I want to accelerate this machine. What is Newton's second law? Force equals mass times acceleration. So I have a certain mass. I know that. And it's not going to change wherever my air density is or anything else. This is my mass. Okay? I have a certain amount of force. Yeah, let's talk about that. But I have some force, whatever it is that's on this thing. That force is going to affect my acceleration. Okay? If I have less force, I have less acceleration. I have more force, I have more acceleration. So air density, how is that affecting the force that's produced by this airplane? Well, come back to engines. The engines have 4 strokes. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. However much air, however much oxygen I have that enters that combustion chamber is going to provide the power when I get to the power stroke. Okay? So when I get less air enter the combustion chamber, I'm going to have less power. Less power means I have less force on the propeller.
And if your engine has a turbo, then you don't care.
Well, I do care because the engine could make more power if I have a turbocharger or a supercharger. I'm happy with that. And you guys remember we talked about a way to introduce artificial pressure into the combustion chamber and make this the same at whatever altitude I am or whatever type of conditions I'm at. But remember your basic lift equation? That lift is a function of angle of attack, speed squared. So I got same angle of attack on the propeller. I got the same speed because now I have an engine that's producing the same amount of power. but it's also a function of rho. It's also a function of air density. So I have a less effective propeller. Damn propellers. Oh, man, dang it. And less lift, because I have I have less pressure, right, coming over these wings. Now, the balance point where it really turns into a crazy scenario is you're telling me that things perform better when we're at sea level. Remember, depending on the type of performance we're talking about. So yes, for acceleration, things will perform better when I'm at sea level. Well, then why doesn't the A330 fly at sea level all the way over here? Okay, fair question. The primary reason why, is because my engine is going to consume a lot less fuel when I'm up there. Plus, there's a lot less drag. If I have fewer air molecules, there's less that's going to cause drag on that airframe. So yes, once I get to altitude, this is a great thing, providing I have sufficient power to take it up there and maintain flight. So with a turbocharger, yes, I can go higher. With a turbofan engine, I can go much, much, much higher. But that's a different type of performance that we're talking about there. I'm talking about cruise performance now and not accelerating the airplane. Great, I still think you're looking at my slides. Great question, but is everybody on board? The reason why these things have more or less performance based on my air density, which is what we're solving for first, is because the thing either won't have enough power or will have more power to accelerate the same as standard conditions. Okay? And then if I have a heavier airplane, which is one of the second things that I usually solve for, well, force equals mass times acceleration. So if my airplane is heavier, I'll have less acceleration for any given force. Okay? All right. Now, as promised, we were going to go back to this guy here, Lake County. But like we're talking performance. Okay, got it. 9,934 feet. We just looked on this last chart. If I had just 60 degrees Fahrenheit, even 57, 56 degrees Fahrenheit, because that takes me to the top, I got 12,000 feet density altitude. And that could easily exceed the performance limitations of most small airplanes. All right? So that's just bringing us back. How long is that runway? All right, 6,400 feet. I like that. That's pretty good. So I got a lot of runway, but if I don't have some way to add more power into this combustion chamber, I'm not going to take off. Now, going directly underneath this, these are actually right patterns for runway 16. Okay? So it gives me a little bit more information there. All right, maybe we need to review the legends. Okay, takeoff distance. Couple of them. There you have weight 2,400, 23, 2,200, and 2,000. Depending on my indicated temperature, I either have 0, 10, 20, 30, or 40. I come over here, I get my answer. If my airplane falls between two of these values, interpolate. And don't make a life career out of interpolation. Just get somewhere between the two values and you're pretty close. I usually caution on the high side. So in other words, if I know that I'm halfway in between these things, I usually caution towards give me a little more runway. What are we talking in difference in feet? 925 and 750? So not a whole lot, but I would caution towards the higher value. Okay? All right. Wind velocity. One of the last things that you're going to correct for is wind velocity. Wind velocity is going to either help or hurt us, but typically it's going to help us. Which way do we take off if we're going to take off and choose a runway? Into the wind. Okay? So I want to have some wind component that's facing the front of the airplane. The reason being, if I'm 100% still, if my speed is 0, and I have a 10-knot headwind component, then I already have 10 knots. I only have to accelerate to 55, so I already have 10. Now, I only need a ground speed of 45 knots, and I can take off, because I have 10 knots already on the wind, all right, already on the wings. Landing, the same thing. I'm going to land at my landing speed. That's important. I say all, but nearly all, 99.99999% of airplanes will have a specified landing speed. So I want to approach and land that airplane at that speed. I get into ground effect, and then I start bringing the nose up to land on the upwind tire. But I want to have my airplane at that landing speed. If I have a nice wind over the nose, that decreases my ground speed. Less wear and tear on the gear, which is now completely removed on this airplane. It's a retractable gear. But it's also got a little cowling problem. All right, much better cooling, right? I don't know, I think they might be. Okay. Well, Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate with our needs. In other words, I might not have a wind that's blowing straight down the runway, and instead it's blowing at some small angle or even a large angle to the runway. To find out my wind component, each POH will have one of these crosswind component charts in it. And I just go to however many degrees is different between my wind and the runway. So if I'm taking off from runway 9 and my wind is at 060, that means I have a 30-degree difference between the runway and the wind. 30 degrees difference, here we are. Okay? So I know somewhere along this line, I'll find my wind that is given by the control tower, by ATIS, by ASOS, by my inspection of the wind direction indicator. However I get this data, I got 30 degrees of wind. I come down to one of these lines. Let's say it's 20. Okay? And then I can come straight down to find the crosswind component and straight across to find the headwind component. So for each wind, I'll find my headwind component. I'll also consider the crosswind component. Okay. Best power and mixture range. Coming back to this, we've got, all right, pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature. So sea level, and then here's my temperatures. I look horizontally to the appropriate power line, 75, 65, or 55% power. I usually want to get somewhere. If I'm flying a long way over water, I might want to take a little bit more of a modest approach. As long as I have plenty of fuel, maybe 65% power. If I want to stay in the air for a long time, maybe I get 55. So whatever your desired performance requirements are, and then you come down to the bottom to find your range. So I'm not going to try to find out with a flight computer how long I can fly in this airplane. Because if I'm making these calculations, I'm not adjusting for how long it takes for me to climb, anything else, right? What my mixture requirements are for takeoff and climb. This has associated conditions. Mixture is leaned per section 4. And I have mid-cruise weight, 2,300 pounds, no wind, 48 gallons usable fuel, and wing fairings installed. So it tells me all of the information that I need. My airplane should be similar in configuration to this, although training airplanes don't have wing fairings installed. But then I come across and find out this is how far I can fly in that airplane. Use the chart to find out how far you can fly in the airplane or how long you can stay in the air. Cruise power settings for true airspeed, easy. Find out my ESA. Who's ESA? That's some Spanish girl in Miami? It's International Standard Atmosphere, okay. So ESA minus 20 or 15 minus 20, right? ESA standard day or ESA plus 20. And then I go to my pressure altitude, wherever I plan on climbing to, whatever my cruise altitude is, and then come over to find, here's engine speed. Ooh, manifold pressure. This one has a constant speed propeller. Fuel flow per engine. So if it is a multi-engine that I'm talking about, what's my fuel flow per engine? And then true airspeed in knots and miles per hour. So I can find my predicted true airspeed based on the performance charts. All right, faster airspeed, do I get more or less range or more or less endurance? Okay, well, if we're talking zero wind, right, so keep everything the same, keep it all zero wind, this chart's going to kind of describe where my maximum range power setting is. Look at this. This is very, very, very slow. Here's my power required for level flight, so I could probably get the airplane up there a little ways. All the way down here at the bottom, that's my maximum endurance power setting, and then the maximum range is right there. Maximum range airspeed. Okay? So if I want to maintain the maximum range, or I want to maintain the maximum time in the air, you've got to fly the airplane a lot slower than what you'd normally fly. What do I normally want to do, though? If I'm going to fly in 120, exactly. If I want to fly somewhere, let's get there. That's the whole point about flying airplanes. Let's hurry up and get there. Okay. Talk to me real quick about this power required and airspeed. I still got the exact same power required chart. You see, it's the same chart. Same exact chart. This is total drag. This is just a review on my aerodynamics. I just want to make sure. This is a hard pill to swallow sometimes for people. They think, I want to go slower, I use less power. Okay, that's fine. You can shut the power off completely and you fly right there. Slow as you want to right there at best glide speed. But if I want to fly slower and maintain altitude, I have to increase power because I have a whole lot more induced drag on that side of the chart. Okay? So that's the back side of the power curve. Okay, this is power required. How much power do I have? Well, this is your maximum available power. Believe it or not, I have my maximum available power as a curve. It's not a straight line, but it exists as a curve and tapers off a little bit as we increase airspeed. But this is my maximum level flight speed for any given altitude. Typically speaking, you want to be somewhere close to that, as long as I don't go over 75% power. All right? So if I'm making normal aspirated engines, so no turbochargers, no turbine fans, no turbines, no superchargers, none of that stuff. If I'm flying my airplane and I'm on the ground or near the ground and I apply takeoff power, which is full open, I'll probably make somewhere around 100%. But if I climb up to 6,000 or even 7,000 feet with the power set right where it is, all the way full open, I still only have 70, maybe 65, 71, 72% power because we're at a higher air density, right? No, excuse me, higher density altitude. I have my airplane at a much higher altitude, so there's less air that's available, okay? So maximum available power might be 75%. It should be less than 75% if we're going to fly one of these things. Okay. Conditions. Let's take a look at the climb performance. How high can I climb and at what rate? If I have an obstacle that I need to climb away from, what airspeed do I need to use and how much performance do I get out of this machine? What do we solve for first always with performance issues? Air density. Okay? So I got air density. I follow it up. Here's your temperature. Go up to the pressure altitude and move over to the diagonal rate of climb line. Higher air density, I'm going to have less rate of climb feet per minute. This is usual, this is normal for a training airplane. So if I'm at this air density, which looks like we're at 5,000 feet and a little bit warmer than standard temperature, I might only get 340 feet per minute. I'm still climbing. I haven't reached the service ceiling yet. And service ceiling is when I can still climb when I can still climb at least 100 feet per minute. Absolute ceiling means I can't climb any more at all. But I'm still climbing, just not very quickly. Okay? All right, during that climb, how much fuel do we consume? It changes along the way. Don't try to calculate how much fuel you'll consume in a climb unless you consult this chart. Very, very simple chart. Take my weight, fine. Pressure, altitude, great. Temperature, I gotta change just a little bit for standard temperature, but this will give me a good indication to start with. My climb speed, and as you see, it decreases as I increase my altitude. So this is fine. I got climb speed and knots indicated airspeed, and then rate of climb, time, fuel, and distance from sea level. This slide and this example exactly has given me, all right, just a little bit for, I started at 2,000 feet and I'm climbing to 8,000 feet. If you're starting at exactly sea level, you just take the values, whatever are here. 17 minutes, 3.1 gallons, 22 nautical miles. But if you started from a field elevation that was 2,000 feet, I got to take this off because I'm already at 2,000 feet. So 17 minus 3, I get 14. Do the same thing for fuel and distance. This assumes zero winds. There's a lot of assumptions here. Number one, if you use flaps up, full throttle, standard temperature, I add 1.1 gallons just to start the airplane, taxi it out there, and get ready to take off. Mixture leaned above 3,000, and then here I increase time, fuel, and distance each 10 degrees above standard temperature, and it's based on zero wind. Okay?
We're talking the temperatures that are on the ground. Yeah? On the ground.
Temperatures that are each altitude. But what I'll do is I'll slide that ESA temperature either one way or another. So you'll do it based on ESA. If I'm 10 degrees higher than ESA, then I'll make this adjustment by 10 for the entire way up. Right? It's a swag. It's not an exact science. We're not sending Apollo 13 back to the moon, right? And unfortunately, and I do the same thing too. You know what? I want to get this as exact as possible. All right, but it's a swag. It's designed as, let's get a pretty good idea where we're at. Okay? All right. Again, if we had any kind of wind, we would put the wind and make the correction there. I can't tell you how important this chart is and how frequently I find that pilots give me a north and south, but then they really can't use it. Remember, and you said radial. Oh boy, wait until we say radials. Well, we're going to try not to say radials, but all right, I gotcha. What he said is I'm going to go to my, whatever the degrees are, I'll go to that wind speed, and then I project to the horizontal and I'll project to the vertical axis. That's fine. Think, though, for a second that I might want to consider that maximum demonstrated crosswind. Because an airplane doesn't have a maximum crosswind or a limitation. It's got something that has been demonstrated by a test pilot. Who survived. Good. And they didn't break the airplane. They could reuse it. Okay? So a maximum demonstrated crosswind exists for most airplanes. So if I want to consider what's the maximum wind gust that I could fly with this maximum demonstrated crosswind, I would come here to my demonstrated crosswind, go to whatever angle it is between the wind and my runway, and then consider where I am on that curve to find the maximum gust. All right, so there's a couple different ways to use a chart. I think we're going to be okay. Okay, ta-da! What do we got? Airplane takeoff distance chart. Just another example of how to solve for takeoff distances. Very first, what are we solving? And everybody shouted out, air density. Okay. All right, we're going to solve for air density. And then what are we solving for? Weight. And then whatever the wind component is based on this, the headwind component, could be a tailwind. There's some allowance there for a tailwind. And then go to find out what's my ground roll, what's my distance above a 50-foot obstacle. All right? Okay, back to air densities. There's a best angle of climb and there's a best rate of climb. I'm going to describe the two of them. Okay? Best angle means the maximum amount of altitude for the least amount of distance. If I try to clear an obstacle, if that's what my goal is to clear an obstacle, I need to use the best angle of climb. Best rate of climb is the maximum amount of altitude for the least amount of time. Okay? And these are published and they also change. This one changes with altitude. So as I increase altitude, my best angle of climb increases slightly. As I increase altitude, my best rate of climb decreases slightly. And they both do this on a straight line. It's not a curve. That's kind of nice. They intersect at a point where the airplane can no longer climb. Stall speed doesn't work here, believe me. Okay. They both intersect at a point here where at the absolute ceiling. An airplane cannot climb anymore at all. This is called a service ceiling, where I can still use the airplane a little bit. What's that? Absolute ceiling? You're stuck. That's fine. You just can't climb anymore.
No more engine power, yes.
No. It's not anymore. Well, no more excess power. I don't have any more. Remember this chart here where we were talking maximum available power? That's where I am now. But I'm at there because of altitude. So, and this entire chart will slide to the left, and for non-turbocharged airplanes, it'll slide left and down. So it's really nice, but this means that I get there. I can fly. This one is at 17,100 feet, whatever I got there. So at that altitude, my airplane is not climbing anymore. I can sustain flight. Do I need to have any oxygen on? Yeah, I can have oxygen on. Passengers too, okay? But service ceiling means that I could still climb just a little bit. So if I see something, a reason, if I have some object or any kind of instance where I need to climb, I can still climb with my service. Only 100 feet a minute, but I can still climb slightly. At the absolute ceiling, the only options you have are to descend, to climb, which now is going to make me descend because I use some of that lift to turn the airplane, or turn the opposite direction. Those are the only three options I have at my absolute ceiling. Okay? You won't climb that high. You won't even climb this high. Most of the training is going to occur right here, just because it takes you so long to get there too. But again, it depends on clouds. But it's not. If you climb up 8,000, 10,000, 12,000 feet, it took you a long time to get up there. Take a look at this one. It's not. This isn't a Cessna 172 climb chart, but it's pretty close. 10,000 feet is going to take you half an hour to get up there. It takes a long time. Okay, let's talk cruise climb. Remember I told you guys that cruise climb was a very important thing, and it is. Here's your normal cruise climb for a Skyhawk, 8-0. Write it down, take a picture of it, text all of your family and friends that the normal cruise climb in a Skyhawk is 80. Get a tattoo of it here on your hand, right? Remember 80 knots, because that is a very nice cruise climb speed for the Skyhawk.
No matter where the aircraft is.
No matter where. Yeah, and that makes it nice too, because here we're talking, if I were to climb with my best rate of climb, first I'm going to start at 76. I'm going to climb a little bit, then I'll go to 75, then I'll go to 74, then I go to 73, 72, 71. If I need that best rate of climb, which I can tell everyone here that you won't need it, and if you're looking at this that carefully, there's some other part of your flight that's falling apart, okay? And I've never experienced any reason at all to use the exact best rate of climb ever. There's been times where I've needed a best angle of climb to get over a few obstacles in some airfields that I was landing at. But I only use that for the first 60, 70, 80 feet, done. And then I go straight to a cruise climb. A cruise climb, if I look at the difference here, and yeah, I got it. They're trying to show me the difference between two different airplanes. But if I have a cruise climb, my airplane is probably only angled like this. Because what's climb power? Full open. How can I control airspeed if my throttle is pushed full open? There's only one way. That's make the nose go up. Right? So if I increase the pitch of the airplane, I get a lower speed. I might get VY, VX, whatever the case is. But can you see out of the front? Nope. Not at all. What's over here? All over the place in the training environment. Your friend in the other airplane trying to learn how to fly. So you got student pilots all over the place flying around. They can't see each other. No, that spells disaster, okay? Decrease your pitch angle, fly at 80. Something else that occurs is the air coming into the cowling. This one's supposed to have a cowling on the top too, I get it. But remember, we said that these cowls were very closely baffled. So it has little pieces of rubber all inside. When they put that cowl on, it fits tightly. And it fits tightly so that it gets the maximum amount of airflow and cools those cylinders off as much as absolutely possible. If I have takeoff power and a very slow airspeed, I could exceed the limitations, the heat limitations on the airplane. So just make it 80 knots. Better cooling, better visibility, better deck angle. Anybody been a flight attendant? I usually got a flight attendant somewhere. Okay. Deck angle, so if they're taking that beverage cart and they're pushing it up the front of the airplane, they're going to appreciate the deck angle. Because if you're flying at VX, oh, I hate this pilot, oh my gosh, right? Okay, deck angle is a real thing. And not only for the flight attendant, but for any passengers you have in the back. If you got somebody in the back of this airplane and you're flying at VX, they feel like they're going to die. They're like, oh my God, am I on the Mercury spaceship here? What are we doing, right? All right, so that's normal cruise climb. This is best angle of climb. Look at the difference in the two. Just a very, very slow airspeed here. You are getting the maximum amount of the maximum amount of air altitude for the least amount of horizontal distance. If there's a large tree in front of you, you're going to use this. But there's not a 4,000-foot tree. So as soon as you get over the tree, just make it a nice climb. And then it describes here in the book, it tells me, all right, this airplane does like that. That's another single-engine airplane, what I call an airplane with not enough engines, okay? But the airspeed here is just a little bit faster, a little bit different, all right? Nobody's flying a TBM or a Pilatus anytime soon. Examples of best angle of climb, here it is, and best rate of climb. There's that. So the best angle of climb has changed if I add flaps. But I have to fly the airplane in accordance with the airplane flight manual, or the POH. Depending on your airplane, and it says in the 172, the short field takeoff is with 10 degrees flaps. So flaps add lift, they also add drag. The drag is a side function of lift. So that's why they're called high lift devices. I will make a slower airspeed and more lift with some flap extensions. So if I have flaps set to 10, for instance, yeah, that's fine. But if I have flaps set to 40, thinking that more is better, that's the American way. Hey, if a little bit did it, a whole lot more is going to do better. No. If you try to take off with 40, that's an easy way to die. Right? So I have to go by however the maximum amount allowable of flaps are. And we're talking just a moment on configuration, so I always try to make sure, remember, if I experience some sort of issue and I'm close to a climb away situation, I don't want to make configuration changes from 10 degrees to 0 because the airplane will sink rapidly at that point. The only point in time, let's say I come in and I'm going to land, life is good, the instructor's looking, he's smiling, everything is great, he or she, they're having a good time. Almost on the ground, and a coyote runs out in front of you. Yes, we have coyotes. Okay? Coyote runs out in front of you and you're like, oh man, I need to go around. And you add power, well, I want to also take from 40 degrees flaps, and I want to go to 20, just to allow the airplane to accelerate and climb. But don't make any more don't go flaps all the way up, because you might descend. So yeah, configurations, great point. What am I doing with my configurations? Whatever the airplane flying handbook tells you to do, or the airplane flight manual tells you to do. Okay? All right, landing distance. Does this one look familiar? It's the same exact chart, okay? Different numbers. I'll agree with you. It's different numbers. So I'll tell you, like my wife will tell me, oh, that's the exact same thing almost. You said exact same thing almost. That doesn't make sense. Okay, yeah, so it is the exact same thing almost. So here I'm going to solve for air density. I'm going to figure out how much does the airplane weigh while I'm landing. Weighs less when I'm landing, doesn't it? Probably. No, I didn't throw anybody out in the Everglades, but I used some fuel during the flight, okay? And then I got some sort of wind component, using my wind component chart, and then find the ground roll, find your total foot over distance, okay? It looks like a common chart because it absolutely is, okay? If I want to use it in the column format, well, take your weight, come on over, pressure, altitude, interpolate like crazy if you need to. You only get one of the other charts. Okay? Sometimes they'll give you both, depending on what airplane manufacturer you have. Landing distance graph. Perfect. Okay. This is a Beechcraft Duchess, and the Beechcraft Duchess and any other airplane, Jepson just decided to use this one. There's a reason why. But any other airplane can experience hydroplaning. So the question about what does it have to do with my dry runway or wet runway? Well, if I get on a wet runway, the airplane could hydroplane. Hydroplaning means I just momentarily lose control of the airplane or that side, that tire. You have flight controls, so you can continue to fly the airplane, but brake effectiveness changes. And also, your ground roll is going to change, whether takeoff or landing. It'll change slightly. During the landing sequence, please remember that if you lock the brakes, you're not going to stop faster. This is an example of a brake that was locked during landing. Look what happened. This is a nice tread, too. That's about a $500 tire. And sure enough, they landed, touched the brakes just a little too soon. The brake locked and put a flat spot on it. Okay?
Don't they have an ABS system?
No. The Cessna 172? What kind of training airplanes do you guys have over here? We're not training in Airbuses. Okay? No, the only anti-lock braking system is that guy right there and that guy right there. That's it. Those are the only two you get. Okay? Don't lock the brakes. It doesn't make you stop faster, and it destroys the machine. So instead of having a great landing, you just had a good landing. All right? If I want to find out information about the grade of the runway, where do I go? Yes, I love it. The ugly green book. That's it. 9 degrees up, 9 degrees down, whatever the case is. All right. Landing distance might be shown in some airplanes as very, very simple. Here's your gross weight, approach speed, ground speed, different temperatures. Okay? Flaps lowered to 40, power off, hard surface. Always look at the conditions. The conditions usually spell out that landing procedure. So I'm going to look at my landing procedures in the checklist in section 4. And then as far as the pre-landing checks and the after-landing checks and so forth, if I want to find out what that procedure looks like to land the airplane, go to section 5. That's in your performance. I'll tell you exactly how to land them. Okay? What do we got? Best angle climb, best rate of climb. Which one are we going to use?
Cruise.
Perfect. Cruise climb. Okay. Cruise power settings. What do I know by looking at this chart? What kind of airplane am I in? What does it have that's different than what we have here with this Cessna 172? There's something different here.
More than one engine,
Does it have more than one engine? Okay, well, it has fuel flow per engine, so you're right, maybe more than one engine. What else? Adjustable pitch propeller. Okay. 2 more things and I might have a complex airplane. What are those 2 things? Perfect. Everybody following? This is good. It's really good.